So a few days ago, I uploaded this Create Aeronautics review, and some of you in the comments said you would like to see a tutorial on how to build your first plane. So then I ran a poll. Wow. So in this video, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know to build your first plane in Create Aeronautics. Now, just a disclaimer, I do not know anything about aerophysics, so everything I say in this video is from my personal experience. First of all, I'm going to cover some vanilla Create mod concepts for those of you who have never touched a Create mod before and Aeronautics is your first exposure, which is actually quite a lot of you. If you already know your way around Create, I'd recommend skipping to the following timestamp. Essentially, everything in the Create mod is powered with SU, which stands for stress units and is basically just rotation. So if you take anything from the Create mod and link it to a source of stress, it will turn on, essentially. Now, there are a bunch of ways of generating stress in the Create mod, but the only one you need to be concerned with if you're only focused on making planes is this portable engine. This is essentially a block that is added by Create Aeronautics and is the simplest way of turning fuel straight into rotational force. All you have to do is insert anything that you can put into a furnace. So as you can see, if I put a stack of coal in there, it will burn for an hour 25 and it will produce 2048 stress units. Additionally, you can also use these blaze cakes, which is a new item that is added by the Create mod. And this is basically the most efficient fuel source. So as you can see, if I put it in, it's gonna burn for 5 hours and 41 minutes, and it's gonna produce an extra 2000 SU. Now, additionally, if the only thing you wanna do is mess around in creative mode, you can also use the creative motor, which essentially gives you infinite stress, and you can control the rotation in a singular block. Obviously, this is not obtainable in survival. Now, you can move stress by using these shafts and these gearboxes, which are pretty intuitive, so I'm sure you can figure out how this works by looking at it. And there are also certain ways to manipulate stress. So for example, if you have a clutch, it will stop the rotation by powering it with redstone. And if you have a gear shift, it will invert the rotation. This will be important for later. The last concept that is going to be really important for your planes is these redstone links. Essentially, with a link controller, if you press it, as you can see, by hitting WASD, Shift, and Space, you can control these buttons. If you shift right click, you'll open a menu where you can see frequencies, and these will basically correspond to these link controllers. So if I put a stone here and a stone here, and then right click it with a wrench, it is now on receiving mode. This thing means it is receiving signals. And then if I shift right click again and put 2 stone, so whatever I put in here, if I then put in here, and then click the corresponding button, as you can see, it will power this link controller. This is essentially how you control your plane midair without having to flick a bunch of levers and stuff, because that would get super convoluted. Okay, anyway, now on to the plane building. There's a few things that I would consider before designing your plane. First of all is your center of gravity. Now, this thing I like to generally keep just behind the front wings. Now, with Create Aeronautics' physics engine, you do have a bit of leeway, but just as a rule of thumb, I would try to keep it there. So second of all is your thrust, so your propellers and your in-case fans and that kind of stuff. This is what will propel your plane forward, and also as a general rule, I like to keep it in line with the gravity. If you have it too high or too low, then your plane will probably start flipping midair, which is not what we want. So now let's get started on designing the plane. If you're planning on building one in survival, I would highly recommend experimenting in creative mode first, so you kind of get the gist of how everything works, because I promise you it will be infinitely more infuriating in survival. To make something into a physics object, you're going to be using the physics assembler, and you essentially just place it on anything and then flick the lever, and then it will now exist in the world. So if I throw this away, you can see it's going to start like colliding with the trees. And you can also select an area if you use the new honey glue that is added by the mod by selecting one point and then a second point. As you can see, this whole thing will now become a physics object. Additionally, you can also tweak your selection zone. So if I select 2 points and then I hold shift and scroll, as you can see, it will expand the selection zone. So first I'm going to start with a structure that kind of looks like this. Then we're going to add the front propeller. And I recommend using the propeller bearing instead of these little propellers that come with the mod, just because these provide a lot more force. Now, for building planes, you're going to be using 2 types of sails. First is your windmill sails, which are going to be used for your propellers and your wings. And secondly, your symmetric sails, which are going to be used for your flaps. I'm going to start by just adding a bunch of sails to this propeller. You got to keep in mind, however, these do have physics. They do interact with the world, which means your propellers can't be longer than your plane body. If I had something like this, then this would collide with the ground and it would interfere with it in a bad way. Next, I'm going to connect this up with a source of stress. Now, I'm going to use the creative modus for now, but I will also show you how you can make a survival friendly version afterwards. The thing to consider is the second you link this up, it's going to start turning. Now, this is not a physics object, so this actually won't go anywhere, but you need a way to toggle this on and off. So we're going to bring out a clutch. Now, unfortunately, the clutch is only going to turn off the rotation when it's powered, which is kind of the opposite of what you want. So you're going to need to set up a redstone torch system, something like this, and then put a redstone link or a power source here. So I have it set here to when I press space, the propeller will turn on. Next, let's worry about the wings. You're going to build your wings out of the windmill sails. There's no set way to do this, but just remember the bigger the plane is, the more wings you're going to need. Now we're going to cover probably the most confusing part, which is going to be your flaps. And the best way to do this is going to be using the newly added torsion spring. These springs essentially let you to limit rotation to a certain angle, and I find that about 22 degrees is where you want to set for your flaps. You then want to add a mechanical bearing on the front, and now this is where things get kind of confusing. So you're going to have two sets of flaps on your plane. One is going to be here on the front wing, and then you're going to have one set on the back on the rear wings. The ones at the front are responsible for turning your plane, and the ones at the back are going to be responsible for tilting your plane up and down for landing and takeoff and adjusting altitude. So that essentially means that these two have to spin, or they have to bend in opposite directions, and the two on the back have to bend in the same direction when powered. So we're going to attach our symmetrical sails on the back, just like this. And then you're going to want to go ahead and come to the setting here and make sure you set it to only placed when anchor destroyed. When one of these springs tilts upwards, the other one needs to tilt downwards, so they need to be opposites like this. Fortunately, this is pretty easy just because of how gearboxes in the create mod work. Essentially, when you power a gearbox, just because of how it works, one side is going to spin this way and the other side is going to spin the opposite way. This is because a gearbox is modeled after a system like this that works the same way. So that means if you put a regular gearbox here and then put two shafts on either side, you're automatically, when this is powered, gonna have your flaps tilt in opposite directions. But the issue is this is only one way. You also got to find a way to tilt the flaps the other way, like this, if you want to turn your plane both ways, which I assume you want to. That's when you will need to use the gear shift. So I recommend having a setup like this, where you put a gear shift at the front and a clutch at the back, and then you have a redstone torch here and a redstone torch here, something like this. Next, on the block with the redstone torch powering the clutch, you're going to want to put down two redstone links, and on the block that's got the redstone torch powering the gear shift, you're going to put down one redstone link. Make sure you hit all of these to receive mode. And then just to make things simple, I recommend doing one unique frequency here, so put any combination of blocks into these two items, and then do a different one up here, but make sure that these two are the same and this one is unique. Next, you have to figure out which control will be your tilt left and which one will be your tilt right. So remember what you put in these links, and then whip out a link controller and set your left and right to the frequency. After you do that and you apply some rotational power, you should see that pressing left and right will tilt the flaps opposite ways, like this. Now, to determine which way will tilt left and which way will tilt right is actually very easy, but a lot of people will get confused at this part, so I'm just gonna explain it real quick. Oh, there's no way I'm busting out the paint. So let's say, for example, this is a side-on of your plane. These are the wings, and you have a flap here. Now, essentially, the most intuitive way to understand this, in my opinion, is the wind is coming down like this, and then you have your flaps moving either up or down. If your flaps are tilted up, then the wind is going to hit your flaps and it's going to be deflected this way, and because the wind is going up, that means the flap has to be going down, so it will push the plane down in this direction. If I feel like the an organic chemistry tutor. If the flap is pointing downwards like this and the wind hits the flap, the wind will be deflected downwards, which means this part of the plane would be pushed up. So that means if you have an arrangement like this, when the wind comes, it's going to be deflected down here, which means this part is going to go up. And then when the wind hits here, this part is going to go down, which means your plane is going to roll right. And the opposite direction means it's going to roll left. So now we're going to build the back wings. So it's kind of the exact same process. You want to build the majority of your wing out of these windmill sails. Now the back is a little more complicated because of how the gearbox works. If you just use one gearbox, then the two are going to spin opposite ways again, which is not what you want for the back. So in my opinion, the best way to fix this is just to replace one of the shafts with a gearbox, and now they will rotate the same way. If you want to balance out the weight, you can actually put an andesite casing over the shaft and it will still work. Next, you want to make your flaps out of the asymmetrical sails again. Make sure they're the asymmetrical sails. You then once again need a gear shift, leave a space, and then a clutch. And then here you're going to basically do the exact same thing you did here. I'll go over it again because it can be kind of confusing. You want a redstone torch here powering the gear shift and a redstone torch here powering the clutch. Then you're going to want to have 2 redstone links on the one powering the clutch and 1 redstone link on the one powering the gear shift. Make sure to make these all receiving. Then you're going to make 2 different frequencies. These ones are going to be the same, so use the same item, and then this one is going to be different. Make sure you don't double up on any frequencies that are already being used, because then if you power this one, it'll also power the other one, and that's not what you want. Then you want to put your frequencies down on your link controller, and it should look something like this. I actually forgot the mechanical bearings here. And then next you want to connect this up to a stress source and test your controls. So your down should look like this and your up should look like this. Finally, you want to finish it off by just putting a little stabilizer wing thing here. And that's it. That should be a working plane. The next thing you want to do is make sure you have your wheels all good. I'm going to go ahead and put a wheel here. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and put a wheel back here. Oh, and I almost forgot, you are going to want to slap a seat somewhere on your plane. The next thing to do is to grab your honey glue, or if you've done this already, you can ignore this step. You want to make sure that everything is in the selection zone, and then you just want to grab your physics assembler, slap it anywhere on the plane, and make it into a physics object. So now you have a plane that should fly, and I haven't actually tested this yet, so I really hope it does. You're going to come onto the plane. If you press F5 and then F5 again, you're going to enter the contraption camera, which allows you to zoom in and out, which is super useful. And then you're just going to press space to accelerate and press down to lift off like this. I'm really glad this flies. That would have been really embarrassing if I made this tutorial and the plane did not fly. Now at this point, if you followed the tutorial right, you should have a flying plane. So you're now able to freely make adjustments. Remember to keep the center of gravity behind the center wing and to keep the thrust in line with the center of gravity. If you put down the contraption controls and have a quick check right here, this little box is going to be your center of gravity. And as you can see, it is just behind the front wings. So I perfectly got that without even checking. That's very lucky. Here you can also see the gravity force that's acting upon your plane. I recommend just kind of ignoring this though and just trial and erroring until your plane works. Only because you're actually unable to see the propulsion force unless you activate the propeller, and you're not really going to be doing that when you're looking at this thing anyway. Now let's go over if you want to make this survival friendly. So I've gone ahead and I've used 2 creative modus here, but if you want to build this in survival, obviously you're not going to have access to these. I would start by making sure everything on your plane is connected to one block. So what I mean by that is if I put a vertical gearbox here and power this, then everything on my plane will still work. Start by putting a rotational speed controller down like this. Put a large cogwheel up here, and then you're going to want to put your portable engines down. You can either put 1 or you can put 2 depending on how much stress your plane requires. If your plane is bigger, it will require more stress. Next, you're going to adjust the speed. So if you hold this down, you can adjust how fast this spins, similar to the creative motor. Finally, you're going to put a large cogwheel down like this. And then all you're going to do is connect this thing up to wherever your plane is powered. And as you can see now, if I supply fuel to this engine, it will start turning, and oh, that actually requires more So now we have a plane that is completely survival friendly because it uses these engines instead of creative motors. Now that you have these basic foundations, I hope you're able to start experimenting and come up with designs on your own. Designing planes is going to feel pretty tedious the first few times you do it, but after you kind of get the hang of it, they're actually pretty simple and they're really fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this quick impromptu tutorial. I'm gonna go hide in my hole and probably not upload another video for 3 months. Okay, bye bye.